Hey, welcome back. Today we're going to be going over lesson 3 of our Desmos SAT course. And specifically, my focus for this video is for solving one variable equations, right? And really just exploring what Desmos can do anytime you have one variable equations. So let's get started, right? So the first thing is, right, sometimes you have very long equations, right? And it will take time to solve for that one specific variable, right? Because you might have fractions, you might have multiple fractions. So, you know, instead of, actually manually solving the long equations, Desmos can often solve it without actually rearranging everything and, setting aside one variable. So for example, right, let's say you're given the problem where you have 5 over 6, x minus 3, all right, and then so this right now represents the left side of an equation, and then the right side of the equation um, is this, right? So what happens is that you essentially, when you type this entire equation into Desmos, right, you get this one line, right? And you can see that that line is x equals 23, right? Because it's when all x values are 23. So that's how you know, like, okay, x in this case has to be 23. Another way of doing this is you can type the left side of the equation uh, as a separate graph, right? And you can type the right side of the equation as a separate graph, right? And essentially, when you do that, what you'll see is you'll see that they both intersect at x equals 23. So therefore, the answer, right, is 23. That's kind of a couple of ways to do this problem. I personally like the first way better because it avoids having to type separate equations in and you get your answer kind of right away. So that's kind of how you would just put the long equations in without actually having to solve them. One of the neat things that Desmos can just do for you, right? Uh, so then my question for you is like, okay, when should you solve an equation anyway in Desmos? Um, well, you use Desmos when you have an equation that just contains one unknown variable, right? Or, like I said earlier, if you have fractions, parentheses, powers, or absolute values, right? And you don't really want to get into all of that manually, right? And secondly, the equation may have more than one real solution, so Desmos kind of just shows you all the solutions, right? So you don't have to worry about missing a solution, okay? Um, and of course, right, you might be asked to find like a positive, negative, the least greatest solution, right? Again, it can do that for you. So that's kind of those are some of the use cases of Desmos. Um, However, if you are given an equation where it only takes like one or two quick steps to solve, then I would avoid using Desmos, right? For example, if you have something like, x plus 3 equals 8, you don't really need Desmos for that. You can just do that in your head, right? So those are kind of the scenarios. Um, Now, let's say you are given, and I kind of already went over this, right? You can graph to two sides of the equation, right? Um, and we already kind of covered that, right? If you graph these two, you get that value of x equals 23, which is the answer, right? So once again, that's just a couple of things to keep in mind, right? Okay. Um, Also, right, I think I went over this last time. If the equation given in the problem does not have x, like it might be time, right? It might use t. All you do is just um, replace t with x, right? You kind of x is like what I mentioned earlier, a placeholder or a substitute for t. So again, that's just another thing to keep in mind, right? You can always just replace the variables with x and y because Desmos only kind of reads x and y. Okay, now I'm gonna now show you some instances where you might get two solutions, and this is kind of where Desmos is really useful, right? So, for example, let's say you have the equation, and this is kind of the absolute value, right, on the left side here, and all of this equals a number like 11, right? Now, why is this important? Well, because, right, Desmos here, you can literally just point the solutions out for you, right? You have, obviously, as you can tell, you have -6 and 5 as your solutions here. Um, Now, of course, right, you can always, once again, just make these both into y, and essentially, right, you'll just get this same x values, right, of x equals -6 and x equals 5. So that's just a couple of ways, once again, to use Desmos to get all possible solutions, right? Okay, so once again, use this kind of two graph method where you assign each side to a y value, right? Each side is a graph. When you have an equation that has multiple solutions, whenever the question asks you to compare the solutions, um, and you just want to kind of check that the two sides are equal, right? And then you'd use these, get the points, and kind of verify. So that's kind of the some of the use cases. Um, a common mistake is that if you're using this specific approach, you might think that 11 is the answer, but that's not true, right? Because first of all, you can tell that both of them share 11, and that's a y coordinate, right? Remember, we're trying to find x, so you look at the x coordinate, right? So make sure you don't make that mistake either. Okay, and now, wait, you let's say you're given a kind of an example where you have x minus 3 squared equals 5x minus 9. This is another case where, again, me personally, I prefer to just enter the equation right away because it gives you the lines anyway, right? So it kind of gives you these two lines, and all you have to do is just, okay, look, those are the two solutions, right? Um, three say of x minus 3 squared on one side, and then 5x, well, actually this should be minus 9, right? So you have those two solutions, right? You get x equals 2, x equals 9. But let's say you're trying to find the value of 2x plus 1, right? There are a couple of ways you can approach this. You can make a function called that h of x, and because you know that the values the x values are 2 and 9, you can just say, okay, what's h of 2? Or you can also just say, what's h of 9, right? And you get 5 or 19 um, as your named answers, right? So once again, another very powerful thing about Desmos, it gives you the solutions, and you can also plug in solutions to a function in order to get your answer. Now, the other very important thing is that some SAT questions just describe a situation instead of giving you the equation, right? So what do you do in those cases? Well, then what you do is you choose one unknown variable, and then you express every changing quantity with that unknown, right? And then just enter the resulting equation. So, for example, right, let's say a venue sells n tickets, right, in total. So there are n tickets in total, and x are adult tickets, right? So we have n in total and x are adult tickets. Well, then what would be the expression for writing the number of student tickets? Well, if there's n in total, right, uh, and there are x adult tickets, well, then you do n minus x to find the number of student tickets, right? Now, let's say each adult ticket costs $8 and each student ticket costs $S. So what is the equation for like the total revenue? Well, if each adult ticket is $8, well then you do A times X, right? And you add that to the total amount that's gained from the student tickets. If each student ticket is $S, then you do S times Well, how many student tickets are there? Well, there are n minus x student tickets, right? We found that out earlier. So then you just do 9 minus x. And that's kind of an equation that represents the total revenue, right? And of course, you can say something like y. And of course, right, once your equation represents every stated condition, you can just graph both sides as usual. I know there's a lot of variables in this, but usually they give you the values for the variables, right? So they tell you what a, um, s, n, and y are, right? So once again, that's kind of another useful thing about Desmos, right? You can just find an equation from the problem and just plug it right in to get your answer. Oh yeah, so uh, that's really it for this video. I hope this really helped. I think this is one of the most, again, one of the more basic concepts, solving one variable equations. Um, but generally, like when you do have really complex one variable equations, you do want to use Desmos, so you don't have to do all that manually because it saves time. So, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next lesson.